Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Wednesday night. That means it is time to talk recruiting. And tonight, we're going to talk about the Notre Dame wide receiver board for the 2022 class. This is a very, very interesting position for Notre Dame because there are players on the board that could make this an outstanding wide receiver class. But there's enough concerns with each of those players to make you wonder if they're actually going to be able to land the players on the board. So tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into first of all, we're going to talk about overall the need in the class. Then we're going to dive into what I look for when I watch the film. So when I watch each of these receivers, what are the things that I'm looking for? And then we're going to dive into the film. And as we're watching film, we'll go through the strengths of each player, talk about how they fit in at Notre Dame, and talk a little bit about where things stand with these prospects. So this is what we're going to do, and we're going to have some fun with it. This is going to be in podcast form. So as I go through this, I will just be kind of talking and showing film. If you have a question that you'd like to ask during the show, feel free to super chat it. Otherwise, we'll get to the questions at the end. So let's dive right in. Since it's 8 o'clock and we're gonna have a lot of film to watch. So let's dive right in. First of all, when you look at wide receiver recruiting, to me, here's how I see things playing out. And I'm going to express my optimism, but then also my concern about this recruiting class. My optimism centers around, number one, there's some really talented players on the board. And there's players that if Notre Dame handles recruiting correctly at this position moving forward, as I said, this could be a really, really strong wide receiver class. The concern I have is a couple areas where Notre Dame has to finish with some players, and there's some players from areas where it's been tough for Notre Dame to finish with those players. And I'm also concerned that there's really only one sort of slotty type of player, sort of an after the catch kind of guy on the board right now, as far as we know. They've already taken a 6'3" outside vertical guy. And then with the exception of one player, Xavion Bradshaw, the board right now is made up of players that are big, tall, outside receiver types. And the concern is that this is what Notre Dame has been saying, Brian Kelly has been saying, has been a big reason why the offense hasn't been as good in recent seasons. And he has said that, look, we need more explosive playmakers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you say, well, you said that after you had Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool together on the outside. Well, you look at some of the recruits you brought in recent seasons. You look at the 2018 class, which brought some playmakers. You look at the 2019 class. That class isn't – there's nobody on that class left on the roster at wide receiver. The 2020 class had a couple playmakers on it. One of them's gone. The other one hasn't played a meaningful minute. And then you look at the 2021 class, there's one playmaker in there, but then the rest of it is outside guys. And then you look at this board, and it is a bunch of 6'2" plus guys that you say, well, you're saying two different things, Notre Dame staff. You're saying you need more playmakers, but then you're recruiting guys that are essentially, for the most part, exactly what you've had that you say is part of the reason that you're falling short in some of these big games. So that is my one concern. Having said that, if they land the players that I'm going to discuss what kind of my ideal class is, and it's not earth-shattering. I'm not holding it to the end as some surprise. If you've been following my channel or my website beyond a month, you know exactly what my ideal class is. And so that's what I'm going to push for. And from a number standpoint, I am curious to see what the numbers end up being in this class. Initially, the target was 3. Jordan Johnson transfers out. I don't know if that necessarily means automatically you're going to add 4 to this class. I think there still needs to be some other positions that need to get worked out. But there are some scenarios that could happen between now and the time the season starts where that number could grow to 4. The reason that matters is because there's some top targets on the board that aren't in commit mode, which means you could fill up with some top players now and still go after some of those guys. So that is where they are right now, and that's kind of the questions that I'm looking for when I look into this class. So when we talk about what I look for with receivers, there's basically 5 main categories, and I kind of wrap everything into 5 main categories. And these are the things that as I watch through film, I kind of look at these things one at a time. So when I pop into kids' film, I always watch a highlight first just to give me an initial feel of a player. Then I'll dive into, if I can find game film, I'll try to find game film. But, I'll look through it and I'll evaluate category 1. Then I'll go through the film again, evaluate category 2. Then I go through it, evaluate category 3. And then that's how I come to my grades. And then that's how I come to my analysis. And the first thing I look at, and it's not an order of importance, it's just, this is how you build the foundation of an evaluation for me. This is what's always worked for me. The first thing I look for is sort of size, frame, strength. Just the player's body. You look at his height. You look at his length. Length is very important for me. I would say length is more important for me than height. A receiver, that's going to get into the catch radius, which we'll discuss later. I look for strength and body from a frame standpoint. Can this player add weight? Is it important for him to add weight? Can he get away with his current size or not? Is he a guy that's going to grow too big? And that's a question with some wide receivers. Is he going to outgrow the position? Does he have, what kind of playing strength does he have? How does his strength manifest with his release? How is his strength as he's running his route? How is his strength as a blocker? How is his strength when it comes to yards after the catch? Next is speed. I think speed is the next part I look at. Speed is not an end-all be-all for me, as anyone that's followed me for over the years knows, but it is an important part of an evaluation. And speed is not just, what is your 40 time, but it's practical speed, playing speed. So it begins with the burst off the line, how quickly a player gets to full speed. A guy like Will Fuller is going to be a little different than some other receivers, because Will Fuller is a guy that I thought took a couple steps to get to full speed, but then he had that great second gear, that great acceleration, which is the other part of speed. How does speed manifest? Can you be fast? Can you only be fast on vertical routes, or can you be fast on crossers, drags? Can you be fast out of routes, which I'll get into later? So speed is a part of how a player plays the game. Athleticism is the next part. Speed and athleticism for me, I break up, because you can be very athletic and not fast. You can also be very fast and not necessarily overly athletic when it comes to how you play wide receiver. Athleticism for me is explosiveness, how it manifests itself out of its stance, out of breaks, with the ball in your hands. Are you sudden or are you smooth? I look at foot quickness and agility. I look at hips. Do you have tight hips? Do you have fluid hips, loose hips? Are you a flexible athlete? That matters. That's going to manifest itself when it comes to route running. And then what kind of balance do you have? Foot balance, agility, those two things aren't necessarily the same thing. It has to do with, your ability to take contact. It has to do with your ability to make cuts without kind of getting out of, sometimes guys make cuts and they kind of lose balance, or their body isn't really, maybe they have tight ankles. That can be part of a thing that can affect balance as well. But that's something I look for. That's important from route running, but also even more important with the ball in your hands. Then I dive into specifics of route running. Now, for me, I don't necessarily care if a high school prospect is a good route runner. It may affect his grade, because you evaluate where he is as a route runner. But to me, I always had the stance when I was a receivers coach that I care more about, do you have the physical tools to be a route runner? Because what do I get paid to do? I get paid to teach you how to run. Apologies. I get paid to teach you how to run routes. And as long as you have the physical tools and the traits that I look for, then that's what I cared more about. And I feel the same way as an evaluator. I think what it can impact is that it can impact maybe how quickly you get on the field at some places. So here's what I look for from route running. Number one, I look for the traits above. I look for the athletics traits that I talked about: speed, explosiveness, foot quickness, agility, balance, fluidity, hip fluidity, those type of things. Specifically, how it manifests. How does it manifest in your stance and start? How athletically, how is your stance and start? And then technically, how is your stance and start? Do you understand proper stem? A stem essentially is how you attack a defensive back. So how I always taught receiver play is you want to attack the leverage of the defender, and you want to press for his outside shoulder. So what that does is, so if a corner's playing outside of me and I just run vertically, he's playing outside of me for a reason. He's defending a part of the zone that he doesn't want me to go to. So I would teach my receivers to attack that leverage. So if he's outside, I'm going to attack him outside. I taught pushing for the outside shoulder because what I had found and what, I'd learned from some of the top receiver coaches. I learned this from guys at Bowling Green when Urban Meyer's staff was there. This is something I learned when listening and learning from Curtis Johnson, who I think is the best wide receiver coach in the business. He was in Miami back in the Santana Moss, Reggie Wayne days. He's now the wide receivers coach for the New Orleans Saints. But to me, it's if you attack that outside shoulder, you're threatening him more, and there's a more likelihood that you're going to be able to manipulate him. If a guy's playing inside of you and you attack that outside shoulder, there's a good chance you can get him to freeze, and then you're threatening the zone he's coming to. Because when a corner is defending a certain part of the field and you threaten him on that part of the field, then he's gonna overcompensate or react to that. And if he doesn't, then you're going to beat him. So do you understand that? Do you understand leverage? And again, you don't have to do that to eventually become a good route runner. But if you do, then you're a guy that I project as someone who could probably play early. It'll affect your grade and ranking more than it'll affect my overall thought of you as a prospect. Quickness out of breaks. This is where hips and balance and foot agility and those type of things, flexibility come into play. Some guys are really choppy out of breaks because they have tight hips. I look for one of the things I taught from receivers is your hips are your breaks, not your feet. And when you see receivers that are kind of get real choppy and their arms get out wide, that's because they're trying to use their feet to stop. And really it's your hips. You talk about driving your hips into the ground. That's how you eliminate some of the extra choppiness for a route runner. So I look for that from a technical standpoint, but then also you factor in the athletic part. Do you have tight hips? Are you a player that doesn't have a lot of flexibility in your ankles? If you have tight ankles and you have tight hips, you're going to be real choppy as a route runner, and that's going to impact your projection to the next level, no matter how big and strong you are. So those are things that I look for. Angles out of breaks. Does a player does he understand when to go high, when to break a route off? Does he understand if you're going to bend a speed cut? Look, a speed cut is a one cut. It's naturally going to be rounded, but does he understand the need to work back downhill? Those are things I look for. Acceleration out of breaks. Some guys, it takes a few steps out of a break to be fast. Some guys aren't really fast players, but they make that break and they're gone, and they are able to get out of their break fast. So, I want a guy that's a 4.5 all the time as opposed to a guy that's 4.3 sometimes and 4.6 at other times. Then I look at separation just from a physical standpoint and then from a technical standpoint. So if a player gets good separation, does that project to the next level? If he doesn't get good separation, what are the reasons for it? Is it an athletic problem? Is it a technical problem? Are there things that can be improved upon that allow him to be that? Or is he a guy that's just not going to get good separation? And then you have to ask yourself, does he have other traits that can overcome his lack of getting good separation? Finding soft spots in the zones, things like that. Ball skills are the next thing that I look for. The catch radius is important. I want a guy with really long arms. Even if he's 5'10", if you give me a receiver that's 5'10" with really long arms, I'm going to like him as a quarterback. And, of course, if you're 6'2 plus and you have really long arms, then that's the ideal. Hands, and that's just overall, does he have strong hands? Does he fight the ball? Is he a natural pass catcher? Does he catch a lot with his body or away from his body? Hand speed, when he attacks the ball, does he kind of stick it out there? Does he snap the ball out there? Snap his hands out there. Timing as a pass catcher, that's important. I want receivers that understand to be able to kind of, the ball's coming, I'm going to get my hands out quickly and catch it. Timing as a leaper is important. To me, timing as a leaper is even more important than how quickly you get up there. Timing refers to, do you know how to time your jump? But then also, can you do it quickly? Or are you someone that needs to kind of gather and jump like a high jumper? That's not what I want as a receiver. I want a guy that can get off the ground right now with perfect timing and snatch the ball out of the air, as opposed to a guy that can jump 42 inches at a combine but doesn't know how to use that on the football field. Focus in traffic. Are you a guy that's going to be bothered by people around you? I don't care if you can do it at a 7-on-7. I care about, can you do it on film when people can hit you? Toughness is part of that too, and then tracking the deep ball. I want to see a guy accelerate through the look back. So a lot of receivers, when they're running a route and they look back for the ball, they slow down. I want a guy that when he looks back, either maintains or maintains that speed. And the way I taught it was I taught my receivers to accelerate through the look back. They never did. But if you get that in their head, then when they look back, they're going to maintain that speed. And that's how you can keep separation on deep balls. And then can you track the deep ball? Some guys kind of slow down. They can't really play to the ball. That's one area where I thought Will Fuller was exceptional, as he could, not only was he fast, but he tracked the deep ball extremely well. And then intangibles like production, positional flexibility. Are you just a W, or are you a W, X, and Z? Or are you just a Z and an X? Can you play defense? Can you play running back? Those are all things that are going to factor into my analysis and ranking of a prospect. Injury history, effort, and clutch play. Are you someone that plays your best in big games? And that's one of the things I loved about Javon McKinley in high school. So when I evaluate a wide receiver, and when you want to know why I like a wide receiver, he's most likely going to grade out in a lot of those categories. And those are the things that I look for in a wideout. So let's dive into the Notre Dame board. And we're going to begin with, it's kind of an interesting situation that Notre Dame is in right now, because we talked earlier. I feel Notre Dame is in a situation where they've got to find some guys that can play, that to me can play the slot, that can be X guys, that can be shifty after the catch kind of players. They need that in this class. And right now, when you look at the board, it's essentially Xavion Bradshaw or bust. And I'm going to pull up here. Just here's who we're going to talk about tonight, and here's basically who I believe are the realistic opportunities for Notre Dame, some more so than others. So this is the board right now. Xavion Bradshaw is by himself because he's the one slot type XZ type of recruit on the board, which makes him extremely important to this class. Other guys we're going to talk about, and this is for the most part my grade. I would, if it's going to be pure grade, I'd flip Nicholas Anderson and Taylor Groves. But this Taylor, as a pure wide receiver, Taylor Groves graded out higher for me overall, because I think Taylor Groves is actually a better safety than he is a receiver. That positional flexibility is going to impact my ranking for him overall as a prospect. As a pure wide receiver, however, I think Nicholas Anderson is the better pure wide receiver. So these are the 6 sort of outside receivers that we're going to evaluate today, and that we're going to whose film we're going to dive into tonight. So, and we're going to begin with Xavion Bradshaw, and you all know how high I am on Xavion Bradshaw. We're going to watch his sophomore film. There's not a lot of junior film out there for him. So we're going to evaluate his sophomore film. And the first thing you're going to see about him is he's a young man that has absolutely excellent after the catch ability. There are things he does on the football field that nobody else on this list can do. He's from Bluefield, Virginia, which is way out the West Virginia border. I love that open field speed. He is a kid that is like I said, out in the sticks. There's not a lot we know about him, but you're going to see quickly the things that the reason why I'm so high on Xavion Bradshaw. Number one, I think he has good speed, like very good speed. I don't know if he's a true burner, but he's got good speed. He's got good initial speed. He's got good long speed. He's got good speed with the ball in his hands. Like, he plays fast in everything that he does. You see him getting the corner here on this particular play. But the thing that I like about him is he is the most dynamic receiver with the ball in his hands. And not only is he the most dynamic receiver with the ball in his hands and the board right now, but in my opinion, he'd probably be the most dynamic player with the ball in his hands that Notre Dame has signed in quite some time. As much as I like Xavier Watts, I think Xavier's was a better all-around receiver than Xavion, but Xavion is more dynamic with the ball in his hands. He's more dynamic than Lorenzo Styles with the ball in his hands, and you're going to see him in the return game. He is a very, very talented player. Tommy, this is the first guy we've got into, so you haven't missed much so far. We just did what I'm looking for at receiver, and then what I'm looking, Xavion Bradshaw. But you can see it here. I mean, this is a kid that is just special, the ball in his hands. The player that I've compared him to, if you're someone who likes comparisons, and I don't necessarily love comparisons, but I know a lot of people ask for him. So if you want one, he reminds me a lot of Peter Warrick from Florida State, if you remember. Now, Peter Warrick was also not a burner. He was not a Will Fuller type of speed guy. He was just extremely quick, extremely elusive, and extremely dynamic with the ball in his hands. But I also think that Xavion really catches the ball well. And you're going to see an example here. Look how well he tracks the deep ball. He does that very well. You're going to see several catches on this film of him tracking the deep ball. He accelerates well through the look back. He's a kid that understands route running. This is a perfect example of what I'm talking about here. Yeah, this is a thing where watch him when he comes off the line. So he initially comes off. He has to he attacks outside. That defender overreacts. You see that. So then Xavion rips back inside, which is perfect. That's how I want it, right? But what he does is what a lot of young receivers will do is when they get back inside, they stay inside. Well, you can see Xavion do what I taught and what good receiver coaches teach, which is, make your break, but then get back on top of the guy. And you see Xavion do that here. So he's going to make his little move to get on top, but then he widens back out and doesn't allow that reroute to get him off of his track. That allows him to get separation from the safety. It allows gives the quarterback an angle to get the ball to him downfield. That tells me this is a kid that knows how to play football. He's not just an athlete. This is a young man that knows what it takes to be a good route runner. That's so important in the slot. It's also something to me that gives Xavion, positional flexibility. I don't see him as just a slot. I think he could be a slot and an X. He's listed at 6 foot. I don't know if he's quite 6 feet tall. It's hard to tell from this film. He's 5'11", 6 foot. He has pretty good arm length, so he's going to have a decent catch radius, but he's a guy to me that I view and say, this is a kid that can play the two field positions. He's a kid that can also bring you a lot of impact as a route runner, or as a return man. Now, this is something that I do not like about Xavion. This is something that me as a coach, I would fix from him right away. Watch this lean he has at the snap. He does that a lot. That to me is a penalty. He does that a lot. I want to get that out of him. That's something I would work on early on with him if I was his position coach. So that's something he's definitely going to have to work on. That's my one big criticism of Xavion as a football player. Now, I also like the fact that he plays defense. I really like offensive guys that play on both sides of the ball. I think those are guys that, to me, you're going to bring a level of toughness to the position. That's one thing I liked about Chris Tyree. It's one thing I liked about Kyron Williams. It's, I like guys that Xavier Watts could play safety at a place like Notre Dame. I mean, he was that good of a two-way player. I like guys that play on both sides of the ball. And so the last couple clips, and then we're gonna talk about his recruitment, and where things are going to go with him. So here's another example of his dynamic cutting ability. You see that a bit of plant and quickly accelerate out of his cut. That just, again, that's something you look for, not just as a return man, but it's also something you look for as a receiver. Can he accelerate out of his cut? That's something that I want to see. Here's a really nice back shoulder catch. Good ball trills. He tracks the ball well. Like I said, has good hands. This kid's a really, really special dynamic football player. From a recruiting standpoint, there's just not a lot that we know about Xavion Bradshaw. I mean, he's a kid that doesn't talk to the media. We had one interview with him. We learned that he grew up watching a lot of Notre Dame games. A lot of people in his family are Notre Dame fans, so there's going to be that attraction there. He was at the North Carolina spring game, and that's about all we know about him. As of right now, there's no public official visit set up for the summer. That doesn't mean he doesn't have them set up. It just means nobody knows about it yet. And so that's obviously a little bit concerning, is we don't know a lot about him. Now, from what I've been told in the last month from my sources, is that Notre Dame is pushing for him. He has built a good relationship with Coach Alexander and Coach Reese, and he is a guy that Notre Dame wants. Beyond that, there's just not a lot we know about. I love the toughness here to break off that tackle and get going. I really, really like that. So again, this is a kid that brings something. He's doing things on the football field, and you're not going to see this stuff the rest of this breakdown. You're just not going to see these guys doing the same things that Xavion is doing. And there's another kick return from him, finishes it off with a nice boom. So that is Xavion Bradshaw. Watch one more clip, and then we're going to move on. That's not a great top end. Doesn't stick it at all. Tracks the ball well, but doesn't stick that top end. That's obviously something that he's going to need to work on. So that is Xavion Bradshaw from the great state of Virginia, where no matter what you say, Tommy Leonard, where the true ballers are from. But he, to me, is a must get. He's probably the biggest must get in the class for me, because, as I mentioned, there is nobody else in this class like him that's on the board for Notre Dame. If they're serious about developing a more explosive offense, an offense that's geared more towards, making plays after the catch and being dynamic with the ball and those type of things, this is the kind of kid you get. You just can't build your roster with just 6'3" outside guys. You need players like this. They don't have enough players like this on the roster after this season. Look, guys like Braden Lindsey, Lawrence Keys, they're going to be gone soon. They may be gone by the time this class arrives on campus. To me, Xavion Bradshaw is an absolute must get for Notre Dame. Yeah. It's a good comment, AJ. I appreciate that. Let's get to Tobias Merriweather. Now, this is one of my favorite players in this class. I'm a big Tobias Merriweather fan. This is a kid from the state of Washington, from Union High School in Washington. 6'4", 185, 190 is what he's listed as. He's very skinny right now. 247 Sports ranks him as the number 78 player in the country. That's about where I see him. ESPN and Rivals rank him 160 and 179. I think he's better than that. I think that's too low for him. I think he is a legitimate top 100 player, and I think you're going to see why as we dive into this film. The first thing you're going to see to him, and again, for those who like comps, the biggest comp for me, when I watched this kid, the first 5 plays I watched him, I was like, this is T. Higgins. If you'll remember correctly, T. Higgins ran like a 4.59 at his pro day at Clemson, but that was a kid that was a big play weapon his whole career. And so to me, this is a kid that reminds me so much of T. He doesn't have, he might not have great time speed. I don't know what his time speed is. Some people are going to say, oh, he's not really that fast because he's got the long strides, but this kid can run. And this kid to me has really, when you talk about athleticism and balance and just having the ability to just get off the ground quickly, he's elusive. Even, you don't really see 6'4" guys with that kind of feet. I want to watch that real quick. So this is a really nice route here by Tobias on this. Leans the guy outside, stems him up, and then bam, quick feet to get back inside. Plants his feet well. That's good technique, and then catches the ball with 2 guys closing in on him. Absolutely love that. And this is a kid that, he'll make a lot of plays in high school after the catch. I don't think this part of his game translates quite as well to the college game. I think he's going to be more of a guy that can do things after the catch on downfield routes. So like if he catches a crosser or if he catches a drag or a go route, he's going to make plays. These kind of tunnel screens potentially, but he's not going to be juking a lot of guys. He's not going to be playing in the slot and juking a lot of guys. Really nice route there. That's what I'm talking about as far as reacting to the attacking the leverage, get that guy outside. See how this corner's playing him outside, right? This is what I talked about at the beginning, right? This cornerback's playing outside. You can see his inside foot is kind of stacked up on Tobias. That tells me that he is protecting his inside. His outside. He does not want to let Tobias go outside. So what Tobias does, he stems the guy outside, which is exactly what I want, and then snaps the guy inside, but then he bends back out. He doesn't stay inside where the safety can help. That tells me he's not just a athletic football player, but he's a well-schooled football player, and it also tells me that he's a very smart football player, and those are obviously important things. Really nice, just a quick 1-2 out of that break. Watch him at this top end. He gets out of this top end really quickly, and you don't see a lot of 6'4" guys as juniors getting out of their top ends that quickly. That's a really impressive route. Catches the ball away from his body, has toughness. Really, really like what Tobias Merriweather brings to the game. Tall, rangy, and he's going to fill out his frame. Look at that right there. This is when I talked about, does a guy know how to work the zone? Tobias is showing coverage recognition right here. He sees, okay, they're playing cover 3. You just passed one linebacker. You got another linebacker in your sight. So instead of just continuing to run towards that guy, he settles right there in that zone, right in that triangle, gives the quarterback his shoulders, and makes the catch against the zone. Again, another example that tells me that not only is this kid athletic and talented, but he's smart and he understands the game of football. And that is very, very important. And I think you're seeing why I really, really like this kid. And if you're someone who's obsessed with 40 speed, you may not like him, but if you care about guys being actually really good football players, then you're going to really, really like Tobias Merriweather. Just watch a couple more plays here. They use him a lot all over the field at Union. He's coached well. I mean, he comes from a good program. There's no doubt. I mean, I don't know if it's a good program from wins and losses, but I'm just telling you, I watch this team play, and this team is well coached. They do a good job preparing him. You can definitely tell he's a smart football player. Really, really like what he brings to the table. And you can't teach that size. You can't teach his toughness. He gets up, not affected by the cheap shot, just gets up, first down. And he's going to go about keep playing ball. So this is a really talented football player. And I want to talk about something while we're watching some more Tobias Merriweather film. And it's relevant to him. It's also relevant to CJ Williams, who we're going to talk about next. And I know people love speed, and I get it. But I said a million times, there's more than just one way to be a big play weapon. It's not just about being Will Fuller. There's a lot of different ways to be a big play weapon and to be a really productive football player. And I looked at guys like DeAndre Hopkins, who's one of the best players in the NFL. He ran a 4.57 at the scouting combine. Michael Thomas, who from the Saints, who played Ohio State, caught 149 passes in 2019. He ran a 4.57 at the scouting combine. Cooper Kupp, who's had back-to-back seasons of over 90 catches, ran a 4.61. Jarvis Landry has had multiple seasons with at least 6 seasons with at least 81 catches. He ran a 4.65 at the combine and a 4.61 at the LSU Pro Day. Juju Smith-Schuster was a mid to high 4.5 guy. He's been a very dynamic player in the NFL. So there's a lot of different ways to be a dynamic receiver and a big play receiver than just being fast. And that's the thing I think more of us need to understand when we look at what makes a big time receiver is, yeah, it's nice to have speed, but you got to know how to play the game, and speed isn't the end all be all. And I talked earlier about T. Higgins. T. Higgins and Justin Ross were both dynamic big play weapons for Clemson. Justin did it with speed. T did it with other things, like being a smooth route runner, by being a long strider, by being a kid that knew how to make plays on the ball. That was really good. T. Higgins in college was really good when it came to, being able to attack leverage and use stems appropriately. Very well coached wide receiver. And so he's a guy that I look at and say, that's a kid that to me knows how to play football. And that's why I compare him so often. I like to compare Tobias Merriweather to him, just because that's a young man that knows how to play the game. From a recruiting standpoint, Tobias, I think Notre Dame is in a very good position. I've said this before. I think Stanford, USC, Oregon, Washington, Tennessee, UCLA are programs that are in the mix. If I had to make a prediction today, and if you told me that Tobias is going to commit in a month, and where do I think he's going to go, I'd say I think he's going to go to Notre Dame. The concern I have, however, is that he has mentioned I believe he did an interview with Brandon Hoffman of 247 Sports, where he said he was going to wait till December, January to make his decision and sign in February. And that's fine. I have no problem with that. I'm just saying from a Notre Dame standpoint, that can get concerning, because not only does it mean Stanford, USC, Oregon, Washington, Tennessee, and UCLA, the schools that I think are in the mix right now, not only do I think they're going to be battling this for this long period of time, but there's a chance that programs like Ohio State and Alabama, Clemson, Oklahoma could then get in the mix. And if they get in the mix, it could change things, because those schools have such a strong recent history of producing wide receivers that even exceeds what Notre Dame has done at wide receiver. So I think that's the concerning thing for me, is why, and I don't get too excited yet about Tobias, because there's a long way to go between now and then. And that means Notre Dame, Dell Alexander, Brian Kelly, Tommy Reese, they're all going to have to be on this kid for a long time. But right now, I do think Notre Dame is in a good position. So they just got to keep whatever they're doing now. They got to keep doing it for the next, what are we in May? Next 8 months, 7.5 months, right? They just got to keep doing it. And he's going to be on campus June 11th through the 13th. And that's going to be a very, very important period for Notre Dame when it comes to recruiting Tobias Merriweather. So we're gonna watch a little bit of C.J. Williams film here next. So when we look at C.J. Williams, this film is going to be a little bit different, because Huddle doesn't have one junior highlight of him. They have several games, so we're going to show you some of those games. So I'm going to have to obviously minimize it and at different times. But C.J. Williams is a very intriguing player that brings a lot of different skills to the table. You see him blocking right here. He's a tough physical kid. You're going to see him running a couple routes here. This is against Servite in Anaheim. A couple things that I like about C.J. Williams. Number one is I think he's a really tough kid. And you're going to see that from his blocking, but you also see it from him as a receiver. He's not a burner. I watched him in a track meet the other day, did really well in a 4x400 relay. And I think that's the event I'd expect a guy like him to do well, because he is more of a long strider. He's not a quick twitch guy. He's not a guy that's a really dynamic speed guy, as you see right there. What I like about CJ is the kid knows how to play football. He's an advanced route runner. He's a good athlete, even though he's not a dynamic athlete, but he knows how to play the game. That's a really good route there. I mean, he's getting separation against a really good program. That's a really nice route, bends it off, doesn't take it high, catches the ball clean. He's got very good hands. And for the comp people, this is the guy that I compare a lot to Juju Smith-Schuster. He's a little taller than Juju was. I would say he's a little bit of a stronger athlete than Juju was at the same age. I'd say maybe Juju's about a half step about a half step faster than CJ is at the same age. Again, as a junior, we're talking about junior film. I'm still curious to see what CJ is going to do as he gets older, but I'd say he is a guy that is a little bit faster. Juju was. This is against Orange Lutheran, seam route. CJ's kind of the opposite. I think I might have said long strider a little bit ago. That's not what I meant. He's a short strider. He's not a guy that really opens it up and runs. You can see it here, but I think that's something that makes him an effective route runner. I think there are some parts of his game that I'd like to improve upon. I really like that suddenness right there as a route runner. Guy's got good coverage, and then bam, he's able to get some separation because of how quickly he can sink his hips and get outside. That's really good. Catches the ball in traffic. He catches a lot of contested balls. He played well in big games this year. This is him making plays after the catch where he uses his strength and toughness to do some damage. He understands how to get open, and that's the thing is he doesn't always get tons of separation because I think there are parts of his game that he needs to improve upon from a route running standpoint, but he understands how to get open, and that's something I like about him. Look, you have to understand too, he's going against really, really good competition. But CJ Williams is not a guy you're going to look at and say he's going to come in and catch 55 balls for 950 yards or 1,000 yards and average close to 20 yards a catch. He's a guy that's going to come in and be more of a volume pass catcher. He's a guy that's going to come in and, make a lot of plays and maybe average 13, 14 yards per catch is about it. This is against St. John Bosco in the state championship game. Caught 2 touchdowns in this game, by the way. The highlights are real quick, but you're going to see right here, not this catch. This is a nice, tough route. He's playing against D1 caliber guys. Look at that strength right there to get separation. Catches the ball high. This is that freshman quarterback that people were asking about a couple weeks ago. It's a really talented kid. But the thing about CJ that I really like is he's a guy that's going to be more of that volume pass catcher. He's that guy that's, he may not catch. This is a great, great catch right here. This is a tremendous one-handed catch. And this isn't a big moment, right? Like, doesn't have separation. It's going against a 6'1" corner. Just great body control, really fluid hips, snaps around and just makes a tremendous, tremendous catch in a championship game against a team that's been a top 5 national program for years. This is another really good touchdown catch here. Really nice release. Gets a little separation at the end, but watch him track the ball. This is impressive. When we talk about tracking the deep ball, he sees it, and he doesn't slow down as he works out to the ball. This is not necessarily a great throw. It's not a bad throw. He's putting it out there where only he can get it. But that's really impressive tracking the ball skills right there from CJ Williams. Really impressed by that. And again, this is against St. John Bosco, so this is not against some mediocre football program. This is against one of the best of the best. And, when I project CJ Williams to the next level, I think he's a kid that can play in the boundary. I think he's a kid that can play X. He can play to the field. I think he's a young man that is, as I said, he's not going to be a 20 yards per catch kind of guy. He's going to be a guy that doesn't go 3 for 100 like a Xavion Bradshaw can, like maybe a Lorenzo Styles can. He's going to go 8 for 100. And he's that kind of guy that's going to be a weapon on third down. He's going to be a weapon in the red zone. He's going to be a guy that is just, you have to account for him in a lot of different ways, which then makes the Xavion Bradshaws even more effective. If there's a way for Notre Dame, and so before we move on to the next group, if there was a way for Notre Dame to get Xavion Bradshaw, Tobias Merriweather, and CJ Williams into this class, grand slam home run. Absolutely would love that class. I could see CJ as the X or the W. I could see Tobias playing the opposite of that, X or W, because I think he brings his route running ability and Tobias's ability to kind of work in space and work after the catch could fit into the X position as well. No question. The same way that Chase Claypool fit into that position in 2018 when Miles Boykin was the boundary guy. He brings some of that Chase Claypool flexibility. I think Tobias could play in the slot in certain situations, as we saw from him in his high school film. So I love his positional flexibility. To me, CJ brings a lot of that as well. Now, you're going to use him differently in the slot than you're going to use Xavion Bradshaw, but there's some things you can do with him from a blocking standpoint, from a working the zones and matching up against linebackers and safety standpoint. But he's an outside guy first and foremost for me. But I think he's a guy that is going to just come in and could be that volume pass catcher. And then Tobias can provide you with some big play pass ability. And then, of course, Xavion would be sort of that after the catch guy. And then that gives you time to develop a Maureen Walker if you're Notre Dame, who is the one receiver that is committed in the class. So to me, that would be the dream scenario if I'm Notre Dame, is to get those 3 kids in the class. They're my 3 highest ranked receivers on the board overall. They're 3 guys that to me fit perfectly together. I think CJ and Tobias bring a very unique, distinct skill set. And then, of course, Xavion is completely different than both of them. So if you tell me that Notre Dame's going to get those 3 guys to go with the Maureen Walker, then I won't criticize this coaching staff when it comes to recruiting receivers at all. And it's going to tell me a lot about Tommy Reese, and it's going to tell me that Del Alexander kind of got his head on straight, is now doing what he needs to do on the recruiting trail. Because that, to me, and we're going to talk about other kids because, I don't know if they're able to get that dream class. And so there's some other guys we're going to have to look at. But to me, that's where I want to see it. That would be the ideal class for me. So next, let's get into Darius Clemens from Oregon. Recruiting wise for CJ Williams. Again, I like where Notre Dame is at. He's a kid that's looking at Alabama, Texas, and Ohio State are the other 3 schools. He was supposed to visit Ohio State and Texas this summer, but some track issues have caused him to push those visits off. He is now talking about taking those visits in the fall at this point in time, which is a little concerning for me because it kind of pushes his recruitment down. I was kind of wanting him to be in decision-making mode after he visits Notre Dame on June 25th to 27th. So I like where Notre Dame is at. I'm not, I've had people tell me that some others are reporting that Notre Dame is the clear leader. I don't think Notre Dame is the clear leader. I think Notre Dame's in a good position, but they've got to close because Texas and Ohio State and Alabama are clearly challenges when it comes to a kid like that. And let's be honest, Notre Dame has not had great success getting modern-day kids in recent seasons. And I'd like to see that change. And I think a kid like him could be part of that. I think CJ is the kind of kid that if he can come to Notre Dame and be successful, maybe that starts making future modern-day players a little bit more open to the idea of coming to Notre Dame. That would be another big benefit of getting CJ Williams, and why I think he's also a guy that Notre Dame should push for. So let's talk about Darius Clemens from Oregon. Darius is a kid that his junior film, this is not him playing football in Oregon. This is him playing football in Utah. And so Oregon didn't have fall football. And instead of just taking a year off, Darius wanted to play. So he went and found a high school in Utah to play football at, which I absolutely, absolutely love. So let's watch him. Now, he is a recruit, being honest. We interviewed him a while ago. He says he likes Notre Dame. He's still talking to Notre Dame. He's interested in Notre Dame, but he also said he's going to visit Auburn, USC, Penn State, Michigan is what he told us. And he's not sure if he's going to visit Notre Dame. He said, I'm not sure if I'm going to take an official there because I've been there so many times. That to me was a big red flag when it comes to his interest in Notre Dame. I don't care how many times you've been to Notre Dame. If they're a legitimate player for you, you're going to want to make an official visit there. I mean, because official visits and unofficial visits are 2 completely different things. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on Darius Clemens because I think he's probably the least likely player on this board when it comes to Notre Dame landing, but he is on the board and he's a very talented player. So we're going to talk just briefly about him. First thing that I like about Darius Clemens is he's a big kid. He's a vertical player. He catches the ball extremely well. He's got a great frame. He's a long strider that really starts to pick up speed as he gets moving. He reminds me a little bit of Miles Boykin in that regards. If you remember correctly, Miles was not a guy that really exploded off the line. He was the guy that built up speed, and Darius reminds me a little bit of that, although I'd say Darius is a more smooth, fluid athlete than Miles was when he was in high school. Not a burner, but a kid that can make big plays. I really like his ability to get down the field. His ball skills are outstanding. His focus on the ball is impressive. Catches with his hands, tracks the deep ball well, as you just saw in that place. Very long-limbed kid. And so that's obviously something that I like as well. He's a kid that to me gives a quarterback a really good catch radius, a guy that – and catch radius is important. The reason I bring that up is because the smaller your catch radius, the more accurate that a quarterback has to be. If a guy's got a really wide catch radius, you can miss by a couple feet, and he's got the length to be able to go out there and get it. Now, Darius needs a little bit more work as a route runner, but he has a good understanding, good feel for what he's trying to do. He's listed at like 200 pounds, and he doesn't look thick. So he's a guy that I think could be kind of a Michael Floyd type of body type when it's all said and done. It's a good football player. Again, we won't spend too much time on him because he's at the bottom of the board when I talk about where Notre Dame is in regards to who they're going to get. He's at the bottom of the board as far as who I think they're going to get. And as you can see, almost everything he does is vertical. So that is Darius Clemens. And now we're kind of getting into the territory now when it comes to receiver recruiting where I think there's a drop-off after Darius Clemens and even really there's a drop-off from Tobias and CJ to Darius Clemens, and then there's a drop-off from Darius Clemens to the rest of the board. And there's some good players on the board. But to me, the players that we're going to talk about next are guys that Notre Dame should have been looking at to take the spot that Amorian Walker currently has, that number 3 receiver in the class. They're not guys that in an ideal situation or a situation where you say, are you closing the gap on the teams ahead of you? Are you closing the gap on Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama? The rest of the guys on the board, to me, as the number 2 or potentially even number 1, it's just not going to happen. And so that's why I'm a little hesitant to get too excited, because I see some of these guys right now being more likely options than maybe some of the top players, and that gets me a little bit concerned. So let's get into next Nicholas Anderson from Katy, Texas. Nicholas Anderson has one of the weirdest ranking profiles that I've seen. And here's what I mean. Rivals has him as a 5.5 star receiver. 3-star, 5.5 means if he drops down a point to 5.4, he becomes a 2-star. I think that's way too low for him. 247 Sports has him as a middle-of-the-road 3-star player as well. And ESPN has him as the number 61 player in the entire country. So there's this huge gap in how people perceive Nicholas Anderson. I think he's to me a lot. I think he's if I were to use the Rivals rankings, I'd probably have him as a 3-star, 5.7 guy, or like a low 4-star guy. So he's a 3.5 star for me. That's kind of that low 4-star, good player, but not a top 250 guy, more of a top 300 to 350 guy in most classes. And he's a good football player, but he's just not, to me, he's not a guy that you look at and say, hey, you're closing the gap on these programs because you have Nicholas Anderson. So let's dive into some film. And I think what you're going to see here from Nicholas is a long kid, 6'3", skinny. He's smooth. He's fluid. But what I like about him, and you can see it right off the top, is he knows how to play football. He's a guy that he's a good route runner. He tracks the ball well. The thing about him is that he's just not a real dynamic athlete, and he's not as dynamic at some of these things. Like, his game is very similar to Tobias Merriweather, but I think Tobias is bigger, and I think Tobias is more dynamic. But Nicholas Anderson's a quality football player, and if Amorian Walker wasn't in the class and Notre Dame wanted to take Nicholas Anderson, I'd have no problem with that. I think he's a good football player. But to me, when I look at him, I say, he's a lot like the guys that Notre Dame has had in the past, where you say, well, this isn't the kind of guy that you're beating those teams with. And that's the kind of guy Notre Dame supposedly keeps getting. And that's what I see from Nicholas Anderson. This is a really nice route. This is what I talk about, how smooth he is, right? And just look how effortlessly, very little wasted motion getting to that in cut. Doesn't have to really break himself. This is a speed in cut, not a level, but he levels off, finds the ball. Really smooth, fluid athlete. Good catch radius. I really like his catch radius. You can see how long his arms are right there. So you can see it right there at the snap. He's got really long arms. He knows how to catch the ball, gives his quarterback a real nice catch radius, tracks the deep ball. This is what I talk about. Just watch. There's no slowing down when he turns back to the ball. I really like that about him. Accelerates through the look backs. He's got really good field awareness. So he can stay in bounds on it. This is a good football player. I just don't think he's a guy that is taking you to the next level type of football player. And I think the fact that offer lists don't mean everything to me, but I think there's a reason that a lot of the bigger schools are not going after him, because I don't see a dynamic type of guy. But as you see there, it's a good route. It's a really nice pivot route. This kid knows how to play football. good size. And see there, you don't see a lot of burst there. Like I love on this particular play, I love the catch. I love the concentration and focus, right? The field awareness. But there's no burst here, right? There's no burst there. So out of that double move, there's just not that burst and acceleration that okay, so like that's a great play, but is that going to work against Bama? Is that going to work against Clemson? I just I don't see that. This right here is a really good route from him. This is a kid that's a smart football player. It's a really nice route, gets inside, gets vertical. Now, this is the thing I like too is he has to work inside, but he leans back out so he can keep that separation before he works back inside. I really like that. Again, this is a good football player. Just not a guy that to me I view as a dynamic player. Catches the ball well, good catch radius. There's a lot of things you're going to like. And I know some people like him a lot more than I have. We've had some conversations here. There's some other people in this chat, I believe, that like Nicholas more than I do. And I get it. He's a good football player. I can't help but thinking I'm watching Nebraska film, though, with those uniforms. They just look a lot like Nebraska film. White shirts, white helmets, red pants. It's a nice play right there. Now, I'm curious to see what Nicholas does as a senior. I've seen some workout videos from him where he shows me a little bit more quickness than I see on film. But even then, I don't see dynamic player. But he's definitely a guy that I would, if I was Notre Dame, I'd want to get him on campus this summer. I would love to see him work out, actually. I'd really want to see his speed and such up close and personal. It's a quality football player. Now, when it comes to recruiting, Nicholas is going to be at Notre Dame on June 18th to 20th. I think that I'm curious to see how that visit goes. He's got some other visits set up. He went to Missouri for a spring game. He is going to USC June 11th to 13th. He's going to Oregon June 25th to 27th, and he's also talked about visiting California and Arkansas are other schools I've seen him say he's going to visit. He was recently offered by Texas A&M. So I'm curious to see how if that might shake up his recruitment at all. Obviously, being from Texas, I'm curious to see if the Aggies can shake things up a little bit with him. But like I said, this is a good quality football player. And then we're going to move on. But I just, I don't see top 100 player right here. I don't see top 200 player right here. I see a really quality football player that if he's your number 3 receiver, you feel pretty good about where you are. So that's Nicholas Anderson. And again, like I said, this is where you start to see a little bit of a drop off. Now, the next player I'm gonna break down. The next player we're gonna break down is Taylor Groves from Tennessee, and Taylor Groves is a very intriguing player because right now I see a kid that is one of the few legitimate two-way players that's on the board for Notre Dame. And when I mean legitimate two-way players, I mean like Chris Tyree and Jordan Johnson both played defense in high school, and they're both pretty good high school defensive backs. Xavier Watts was a great defensive back in high school. That, to me, if Notre Dame went to Xavier Watts or if Xavier Watts went to Notre Dame and said, "Hey, I want to move to safety," I would be a little disappointed because I think that they need his unique skill set at receiver. They don't have a lot of after the catch guys. I would be hesitant to do it as a coach, but I'd love it if I was a defensive coach because I think the kid can play. I think he's tough. I think he's physical. I think he is a guy that can play two ways. Chris Tyree is not a college defensive back. He was just a really good high school defensive back. The next player we're going to talk about is Taylor Groves, and he is that kind of guy where to me, actually, I think he's a better safety than he is a high school or a receiver at the next level. So let's dive into Taylor Groves, who is 247 Sports. He's a consensus 4-star, but 247 Sports is the only one that has him in their top 250 or 300. They have him at number 177. Rivals does not have him in their 250, and ESPN does not have him in their top 300. But let's dive in here to Taylor Groves. And first thing you're going to see is a tall, skinny kid that's a pretty good athlete. He's just not a very explosive athlete. Long and rangy, long strider, very, very good length and ball skills. I mean, he's a very natural athlete, very smooth, fluid athlete, not overly sudden. It makes because he's so long and lanky and smooth, it makes his athleticism a little bit deceptive, meaning he doesn't necessarily look as maybe as quick as he actually is. He's a really good football player. I just think he's a little bit too heavy-footed for me to be a really impact wide receiver. I think on defense, I see a lot more suddenness from him when he's coming downhill than I do when I watch him play wide receiver. But he's a tough kid. He's just a football player. I mean, we use that expression, he's just a football player. And, what does that really mean? What it means is he's not a guy that you'd expect to be dominant based on any specific trait. He's not 6'3", 210. He doesn't have 4.4 speed. He's a good leaper, but not a great leaper. He's got good athleticism, but he's not an elite athlete. But despite all that, he's just really a good football player and a guy that can be really good in a lot of different ways. I love the competitiveness of that catch. Goes up and makes that play on a wounded duck of a pass, just outplays two guys for the football. He does a lot of that in high school. He makes a lot of plays, really good closing speed there to get to the ball. So this kid can play. I really like this kid as a football player. And again, even there, not great. He's kind of slowing up now, but not great speed, not great athleticism. Just makes a lot of plays. And there's something to that, right? I mean, there's something to a guy that maybe doesn't have the physical traits of other players, but he just makes a lot of plays. I mean, like right there, it's just the kid knows how to make plays. He knows angles. He understands leverage. He gets open. I mean, he's playing street ball right there. And I love guys that play that. When I say street ball, I want that kind of guy. Like once the ball's in your hand, I want the street ball guy, and so that's a positive to me. That's really nice. He's actually the DB here. So just so you know, as you can see it there, I really like that instincts. He reads the route well, closes on the ball, and just bam, pops that kid. Leads with his shoulder, not his head. Plays with a lot of swagger. Really like this kid as a football player. Again, just not a dynamic guy. And that's really the only thing keeping him from being higher on my list is he's just not a dynamic athlete. But, just as far as a high school football player, he's one of the best guys on his board. I mean, he makes a ton of plays. He makes as many plays as anybody else on the board. He's really, really impressive. Really, really like this kid. Really good body control right there. Skinny kid. I see a guy that has more of a body and game for DB. I love this closing speed. I mean, to me, you guys tell me guys and gals, tell me if you agree with this or not, but I see this closing speed he shows right here on defense, to me, is better than anything he showed as a wide receiver. Watch this. Bam, it flies to the ball, explodes to the ball. I really, really like this kid, especially as a defensive back. And if I knew that I could take 3 receivers and him, and he's maybe a fourth receiver / safety, I'd be more attracted to possibly taking him in this class. But if he views himself as a pure receiver, I don't know if I necessarily want him. The interesting thing, however, is he has expressed to Eric Rudder did it, and I love that body control right there to be able to catch that ball behind and stay in bounds, 2 feet in bounds. Love it. Really, here you go. Look at that closing speed, good angle, just sniffs it out. This kid can play. He actually likes defense more than offense. Well, I'm trying to remember the direct quote of exactly what he said, but he kind of views himself more as a defensive player than an offensive player, I believe is what he said in that comment to Eric Rudder. And that's kind of what we saw with Cam Hart. And we saw kind of what happened with Cam Hart when he got to Notre Dame. So that's Taylor Groves. So now you got a chance to see Taylor Groves. So from a recruiting standpoint, he likes Notre Dame. I'm trying to find out. He had talked a couple times about possibly making a visit to Notre Dame this spring. I don't believe that visit has happened. I tried to reach out to him today and see if he could confirm that. I'm actually checking my Twitter account right now to see if he has responded to that yet. He has not responded to that yet. So I don't know specifically if he has made it to Notre Dame. As far as I know, he has not set up a visit to Notre Dame yet. I think he's been to Ole Miss, LSU, and Florida are also after him. So I don't know where Notre Dame necessarily stands with him right now. I think that right now they're a little bit behind some of those SEC programs. If they push for him, I think they'll have a chance. He seems to be a high academic kid. He was committed to Michigan, decommitted from Michigan. So I think he's a kid that to keep an eye on is potentially someone that they make a push for if they're able to get him on campus this summer. The last player that we're going to talk about is, to me, one of the more intriguing guys because right now my grade for him is a bit of an incomplete. And the reason I say that is his sophomore film was not overly impressive to me. We're going to watch some of his junior film now, but he didn't play a lot of games as a junior. It's from Massachusetts, so there's not a ton of film that available to me that I have access to. from his junior season that really showed me a lot, and that is Joseph Griffith Jr. from Massachusetts. And this is the most physically impressive kid on the board. And I mean, this right here that's Joseph Griffin Jr., right? This is a big, well-built, strong kid, and he plays exactly like he looks in that photo, as we're going to show here. Just won the Rivals MVP, receiver MVP at a recent Rivals event in New Jersey. So here, when I see Joseph Griffin, I see a kid with the first thing you're going to notice about him, and you saw it at the Rivals camp, is he's got phenomenal hands. I mean, he's got strong hands. He's got clean hands, meaning like he doesn't double catch. He tracks the ball extremely well. He is a strong kid. Very strong kid. Very well built. And those are the things that impress me about him. Here are the concerns that I have. Number one, those are all great things, but I don't see a guy that's a real top-notch athlete. And somebody just, in one of the comments said, Chase Jr., referring to Chase Claypool. And I get that. But the difference is Chase was an elite athlete, not just big. And he is committed to Boston College right now. Notre Dame has offered him, and he is interested in Notre Dame. And so when you look at this kid, he has good size, but I don't see a real dynamic athlete. I don't see a guy that that to me is someone who has great speed. Somebody says he looks like the kid from Ole Miss. You're talking about DK Metcalf. Again, DK Metcalf was an elite athlete. When I see Joseph, I see a big, strong kid, but I don't see great speed. Fluid kind of kid, but not a guy that to me is a needle mover. We've seen what the Notre Dame offense can look with big receivers in it, but what Joseph doesn't have the dynamic speed and athleticism that Chase Claypool brought to the table. He's more of a Miles Boykin to me, but not quite as good as Miles was at the same age. Now, Miles made a jump as a senior, and I'm more referring to Miles as a senior than when he was a junior. But then again, Miles is a really good player, but Miles wasn't Chase Claypool. And to me, there's a difference. That little kid looks about 3.5 feet tall that he's running away from right there. But look, for me with Joseph, I just got to see more film of him. I'm not completely against him as a recruit for Notre Dame, but I'm also not necessarily on board with him yet because I got to see more. And what I've seen so far just doesn't blow me away. It's a lot of what we've seen Notre Dame do in the past. That is one of the things that we all have said keeps them from being to that next level, which is just not a game changer, not a big play guy. And that's my thing with Joseph Griffin. But, good football player, strong kid. And you wonder, maybe he could kind of develop into some, sort of a hybrid player, a Tommy Trumbull kind of guy, maybe. Who knows? But there's not really a need for that. So that's Joseph Griffin. And as I said, my concern with him is there's just not a lot of film. A lot of this is just from a few games. They didn't play a lot of football this year. But he's a guy to me I'd want to see him at camp. I want to see what he does as a senior before I'd make a move on him and say he's a committed kid. Now there's other kids on the board that have offers. Addison Copeland is one from New York. He's not a guy that Notre Dame is really moving on anymore. We're not going to talk about him. He was a guy that I think was just kind of part of let's get some guys on the board. Once Amorian Walker committed, he was pretty much, that's not a guy you're going to be going for. So that's the Notre Dame receiver board. That's where Notre Dame is at right now. As I said, to me, there's a combination of players that can make this a really good receiver class. If Notre Dame gets Xavion Bradshaw and then gets one of Tobias Merriweather, CJ Williams, that is an excellent receiver class. If they get Xavion and one of Darius Clemens, Nick Anderson, Taylor Groves, or Joseph Griffin, that's a good receiver class, but it's not a needle-moving receiver class outside of Xavion Bradshaw. If they get Walker, Merriweather, and Williams, to me, that's a good receiver class, but you're missing something. You're missing that playmaker, that with the ball playmaker, and that's why I say Xavion is so important. I would not complain too much about that three-man class, but again, who's your slot? Who's your playmaker? So you're basically saying, okay, we're going to be a 2 tight end offense with big guys on the outside, and that's what we're rolling with. Well, we've seen that show before, right? We've seen how that movie plays out. And to me, that's just not the only way to go. You need a combination of players. And so to me, putting together the perfect receiving core is not just about getting 3 highly ranked guys. It's about getting 3 highly talented players that fit well together, that play well together, that say, hey, this guy fits in here, he brings this skill set. This guy fits in over here, he brings this skill set. And those 2 guys can be interchangeable in some ways. And then this guy over here brings another skill set. And I think that's important to have. And without a Xavion Bradshaw in this class, I don't know if Notre Dame has that. And that would be the thing that really makes it difficult for me to say this is going to be a great class without Xavion Bradshaw. It could be really good, but I don't know if it's a great receiver class without him. So he, to me, is the key. If they're able to get Xavion and one of Tobias and CJ, that is really good. If they're able to somehow say Xavion, Tobias, and CJ with Amore and Walker, that is the ideal receiver scenario. I mean, those are, to me, plan A, top of the board, top 100 players. I grade all 3 of those guys out as top 100 recruits. If Del Alexander and Tommy Reese can go out and get those 3 players, again, that's Xavion Bradshaw, Tobias Merriweather, and CJ Williams, big thumbs up. I mean, they'll get tons of praise from me. I'll write multiple articles singing their praises as recruiters and their understanding of how to put a receiving core to class. So that's what I look for. Those are the players that I like. Let's dive into some questions. We already have some built up, but if you have questions, please feel free to hit me up. If you want to leave a super chat to support the channel, we always appreciate those. But let's, Brandon says this is definitely the most intriguing position of the 22 class. I agree. In a lot of different ways. Christopher says, I like the new IB hat. I do too. It's a fitted hat. All right. So this is one of the new ones that is in the store that I'm hoping to have launched very, very soon. It's very, very, very close to being done. Larry says, thanks for the show. Appreciate you being part of the show, Larry. Jordan says, Bradshaw, Merriweather, and CJ Williams. Let's go. Mike Singer from Rivals said Notre Dame can take 4 receivers. That's fine. I mean, he can say that, but right now they're not going to be able to do that with what they're recruiting at other positions. We broke this down the other day. If you didn't watch it, go watch the live stream that we did the other day. You can't just say we're taking 4 receivers because that means you got to take somebody else. It means you can't take an extra lineman. You can't take a second running back. You can't take a 5th defensive back. You can't take a 4th defensive end. Somebody's got to go. And it's, you just can't easily say, yep, you take 4. I hope they can get to 4, but that's going to require something different to happen from where things stand right now. We broke down the numbers the other day. Check out that article at irishbreakdown.com or check out the podcast. So I think something has to happen, in my opinion, for them to be able to take a 4th receiver. I hope that they can get there, however, because if they can get that 4, then I'm really happy with this class. Brandon asks, is Nicholas Anderson a take right now, or is the staff willing to wait out the recruitments of Williams and Merriweather before possibly accepting a commitment from Anderson? So here's basically what I have been told is they like him. I have not gotten the impression from the people I've talked to that Nicholas is a guy that they're necessarily pushing for. That doesn't mean he won't be a take once he visits, but I don't think he could just call up today and say, hey, I want to come, and they take him. That's not the impression I've got talking to my sources. That could change when he visits in June because they're going to have a better idea where they are with those other players. But right now, I don't believe that he is a take today. We'll see how that stands. Sid Irish says Williams, Merriweather, and Bradshaw is what we need. I agree completely. Agree absolutely completely with that. And there's a lot of people that are agreeing with this, that with me, that Bradshaw, Merriweather, and CJ Williams is the way to go. Absolutely the way to go. John A1 Go Irish Breakdown, thank you very much for being on it. Notre Dame 2164 says, how many 5-star upside wide receivers do you have are on the board this year, if any? So to me, Xavion Bradshaw is a 5-star upside guy. I'm going to pull up my profile for him right now. And Tobias Merriweather is the other 5-star upside receiver guy. There were some other players on the board that I had as 5-star upside guys, but they're no longer on the board. I had Caleb Brown as a 5-star upside guy. He is no longer on the board for Notre Dame. Xavion Bradshaw is a 5-star upside guy. CJ Williams to me is a 4.5-star upside guy. He is a top 50 caliber player, in my opinion. Right now, that is where he is ranked by some. Rivals has him ranked 27. 247 has him ranked 47th. I'm more along the lines of the 247 ranking just because I think he lacks that true game changer speed, game changer dynamic ability to be a top 25 kind of guy. But he can definitely be that Juju Smith type of really good football player, even if he's not necessarily an elite football player. But Juju Smith-Schuster was a second-round draft pick and a pretty darn good football player at USC. If I'm correct and CJ is a Juju Smith kind of player, he's a heck of a player. But again, I'm pretty picky when it comes to 5 stars, and I just don't see 5-star. But don't get me wrong, CJ's really good. And if he has a jump in maybe explosiveness in college, then that would change, and he could be that kind of guy. But right now, with where he currently is, I'd need to see him maybe take a little bit more of an explosiveness jump before I'm there. But again, 4.5-star upside is a top 50 player. And I think we all agree that you land a top 50 receiver, you're doing pretty well. Delally says, will the younger receivers get more playing time with Coach Reese having more control of the offense? I honestly, I couldn't tell you. I'm hopeful. I hope that happens. We're going to have a receiver show coming up here soon, and we'll dive into that even more. But I hope we see that. I hope that we see Coach Reese use the young receivers more effectively. I hope that we see Coach Reese use a deeper receiving core. That's what I'm hopeful for. But will it happen? Until we get to the fall, we won't know. And we can't really look at the spring because of it, because they did play Jordan Johnson a lot, and then he transferred. And Xavier Watts didn't play a ton, but from what I was told before the game, that Xavier might not play a lot because he was battling a hamstring injury. So it's hard to really know if they're going to use him. They use Lorenzo Styles a decent amount, but will he use those young guys this year? Will we see Deion Colsey? Will we see Xavier Watts a lot? Will we see a lot of Lorenzo Styles? I think that remains it's an open question right now, and I don't have an answer to it. S asks, so 2-part question here. Coach, is a former wide receiver coach, if you could pick between Jamar Chase, is that who you're talking about? Just make sure you're talking about Jamar Chase, not Chase Claypool. Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, Jerry Jeudy, Justin Jefferson to add to Notre Dame's offense this year, who would it be? And then says, crazy that LSU Bama had 7 first-round picks of wide receiver, not including second-rounder Terrace Marshall. Yeah, I agree, 6. If I could have any of those guys for what Notre Dame does, I'd probably go with either Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson. The reason I say that is because, again, part of what makes a receiver dynamic is what he does sort of in that offense. And to me, when I look at what Notre Dame does, they like to do the vertical stuff. They like to do, guys that can stretch the field. They're not necessarily like the elite route runner kind of situation. That's not really where Notre Dame is. And so while Jalen Waddle would probably be the one Bama guy I would look at first, and I'm glad you didn't include Henry Ruggs, because I think Henry Ruggs was incredibly overrated. But, Devontae, how well does Devontae really fit in the Notre Dame specific offense? How well does Jerry Jeudy fit into that? Whereas Justin Jefferson brings size. And even though Jamar Chase isn't super tall, he's like 6'1.5", he plays like a big receiver. And so far from what we've seen at Notre Dame is those big receivers are what thrive. So that would be the guy that those would be the 2 guys that I would look at for Notre Dame. David Knight asks, Brian, do you mind explaining the difference between quick and fast? A lot of people do not understand the difference. I am not insulting anyone. So fast is essentially it's about long speed. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was an explosive, dynamic athlete at Notre Dame. He wasn't fast. And if he would have ran a 40, I think people would have been surprised at what his 40 time was. It would not have been like a 4.4 or 4.5. So speed to me, when I talk about speed and being fast, I'm referring to like long speed. Now, depending on how you define fast, it could be the same thing as quick. And that's when you talk about the difference between athleticism versus how you play. You can play fast because you're quick, but you don't have speed. Does that make sense? So you don't have that long speed. So that's what I say about Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. He is quick, which allows him to play fast. But if we're simply talking about speed equals fast equals speed, that has more to do with pure range and pure like long speed. Quick is more about suddenness. You know, like Reggie Bush, for example. Reggie didn't run like blazing 40 times coming out of college either. But everything he did at full speed. He was able to cut and change direction extremely well. Quickness to me is about being able to do two things at an elite level. It's about being able to redirect, so plant and cut, like change direction, or to be able to plant and drive. And then also, I guess the third thing is to be able to, if you're a 4-5 guy, can you be 4-5 immediately? That's quickness. Dexter Williams, to me, you've heard that expression. He's more quick than fast. Josh Adams ran a 4.48 at his pro day. Dexter Williams ran a 4.58. Josh Adams was a home run guy. If he got in space, he was gone. Dexter, we saw get caught a couple times because he just didn't have that huge, great long speed, although he did have a 97-yard touchdown run against Virginia Tech. But what made Dexter so dynamic and why he averaged such a high yards per carry in his career was he was a 4.58 from the snap. I mean, he was downhill in a hurry, where Josh Adams was more of a guy that needed to kind of get going before he hit that home run speed. So that's the difference to me. And I hope I explained that correctly, or effectively, I should say. I know I said it correctly, but maybe not effectively. If that doesn't make sense to anyone, please feel free to ask, and I will bring it up. Delali says, what benefits can you get from putting a big receiver in the slot versus the outside? Okay, that's a good one. So part of this depends on the offense you run, right? But here's a couple things you can do. So, let's say you have an outside receiver like a Will Fuller, or you have an outside receiver like, you want to use Avery Davis outside and you have a bigger guy inside, whether it be a slot receiver or a tight end. There's things you can do in the screen game that are effective. We saw Chase Claypool play a lot of slot in 2017. They did a lot of things where they would throw quick game outside, and Chase would be sort of the lead blocker. You kind of stack them outside a little bit. There's benefits in the run game, so you're getting a bigger athlete, sort of like think of Chase Claypool, you think of Javon McKinley type of body type, or even Tommy Tremble. Get him in the slot. Now you're matched up. You're trying to throw perimeter screens, or with your perimeter runs, you now have a bigger body that can kind of really win at that point of attack. Because a lot of times what can blow up a perimeter run or perimeter screen is that alley defender coming in and blowing it up. If you have a bigger body in the slot, that alley defender now has to take on a bigger player, and you can stone him. Because what will happen a lot of times is I know coaches that teach this, they take their rover, their outside linebacker that's in the box, and say, hey, if they're running a bubble screen, you take the number 2. So if they're running out of a 3 receiver look or a 2 receiver look with a swing to the back, you take that slot guy and you just blow him up and drive him into the ball carrier. Well, that's a little harder to do to Chase Claypool than it is to Devontae Smith, right? So I think those are some benefits. And then pass game wise, you get a guy that's a bigger body player. So if you're playing a team that runs a lot of zone, you got a guy that can kind of work the middle of the field effectively, almost as like you see from a tight end. You see a guy that can give you some isolation, downfield isolation type of route. So, a guy that can, you can really throw it high and that back shoulder up the seam. You can be more effective there to try to, you've got that zone between the linebacker and the safety, right? If you got a 5'11" guy in that zone, it's a smaller target window. And if you miss by 3 or 4 inches, that's the difference between that ball getting caught and sailing and getting picked off by the safety. Well, that same throw going to Chase Claypool is getting caught. So you give some advantage there to the intermediate stuff. You can bang some corner routes where maybe if you don't get separation against a really dynamic safety, you can throw it up high and allow the bigger receiver to get it. Notre Dame did a really nice job with Chase Claypool in 2017 with Brandon Wimbush of doing a lot of drag routes, a lot of deep in cuts, things like that. Go watch the Wake Forest game and you'll see if you want to know an example of it, go watch the 2017 Wake Forest game and watch how Notre Dame used Chase Claypool effectively in that situation. So it's not something I would do all the time, to be honest with you, but I do think there are times when it can give you advantages, and it definitely gives teams something to think about. So, let's say Notre Dame comes out this year and their starting lineman is Braden Lindsey at and at outside or Lawrence Keys outside, and you've got Avery Davis in the slot and Kevin Austin backside. That's a good alignment. But if they came out the next series and they had Kevin Austin at X, Deion Colsey at W, and Joe Wilkins in the slot, or Kevin Austin in the slot and Joe Wilkins outside, and they had that bigger alignment, that could be successful too with certain things. And that's why I like really mixing up personnel. I think there's just some advantages to having those guys in the slot, not just run game, but also in the pass game. So hopefully that answers your question. Griff says, Tobias seems like a very high upside guy, but also looks like he could be an early impact guy, although we all know how that goes at Notre Dame. I agree with the first two parts. I don't want to take too many shots at the staff because people get all upset about it. But, to me, he's a guy that to me is almost – he'd be hard not to play because he's – number one, he's really talented. But to your point, Griff, the reason I think Tobias could be an early to play guy, even at a place like Notre Dame that doesn't normally play young guys, is he's really advanced technically. He's a smart football player. He runs a lot of different routes. And this is something you have to look at when you're projecting a guy to can he play right away at a place like Notre Dame. Some guys are just like, when I watch Darius Clemens does like three things in film. Now, he does it really well, but he's like go route, post route, like slant, hitch, that kind of stuff. Tobias Merriweather's running double moves. He's running deep ends. He's running post corners. He's running, from the slot, doing wide fades. He's doing a lot of different things as a wide receiver. And that makes him a player to me that, as I said, not just talented, but a really high IQ, experienced football player doing a lot of different things, which means he'll likely take a step, he'll take a step into the offense a little quicker than maybe some guys who are just getting by on their athleticism. Ryan Henke, 109 days till kickoff. I hope that you're correct. I'm getting very, very excited about the season. I said this to somebody earlier, the last couple weeks especially, I'm just starting to get real fired up. And I normally don't get fired up about the season this early. This early, I'm kind of like, it's still several months away. But I'm getting really excited about the season. I think this team's just is exciting me a little bit. Okay. Technical technician, I'm not going to play that comment that you left. I appreciate that, though. You need to hit me up on Twitter. I have a question that I need to ask you, by the way. Technical technician also says Bradshaw is a much more explosive Theo Riddick. That's a great thing. And I would say also not only explosive, but also taller. He looks taller than Theo. And I think there's a need for that type of after-the-catch guy in this offense. And that's why I say if you don't get that, then I have a little bit of a concern there. As we were watching the Xavion Bradshaw comment, AJ said, bobbled the punt return. Don't do that in front of BK or Matt Salerno will take your place. That is funny and true. Let's see here. Ian Moran says, you see any other offers will go out at the wide receiver position? I could see a couple going out. I think especially if they're able to identify maybe at some camps this summer, whether it be a Notre Dame camp, whether it be one of the Under Armour camps, or because a lot of times those places will send teams, you can actually get the film from them for these things. So like there may be some kids that are like the slot players that they see from camps this summer. They may get some new film and evaluate some guys. So I could see those types of players getting some offers, especially if they don't feel they're going to get Xavion Bradshaw. But I think outside receivers, it's just focus on the guys that you have on the board right now. You got some good players at the top, and I don't know if there's anybody you're going to offer that's going to be better than Tobias or CJ. So focus on those guys. But if you don't think you're going to get Xavion Bradshaw, then you need to find some slot players that you can go after. David Knight talking about technical technicians about Theo Riddick. Theo was uber talented. I saw him rip off 3 TDs against the Colts. He was just missing that last gear, regardless of fantastic player. Yeah, and that's David. That was the one thing Theo did not have. He just did not have that home run second gear, and that's really the thing that kept him down, in my opinion. Jonathan says in response to Ian's question, I think after the June visits and the staff knows where they sit with their top guys. Potentially, but I would say if they're offering guys, Jonathan, and I think you're right in theory that could happen, but that would concern me because if you're offered a bunch of guys after June visits, it tells me you don't think you're in good position with those other players, and that would be a concern for me, very concerning for me. See if we have any more questions here. Another great show. Love the film breakdown. Jordan, appreciate you being part of the show, buddy. Very much so. And I know that you missed, I think you missed today's show. You had to catch up on it late, so I'm glad you were able to get in on this one right on time. Griff says, could you see a scenario where Indy takes 4 receivers with one of these tier 2 guys being the number 3? I would not. Look, you'd say, okay, that's still, you're talking like Nicholas Anderson and something like that. I just wouldn't do that. To me, now all of a sudden you're loading up your depth chart with guys who aren't gap closers. And now you've got 2 guys like that in this class. And to me, I'm just not doing that. I can't justify that to me. Just take 3 and have the other 2 be, like a CJ or a Xavion or a Tobias and Xavion or Tobias and CJ, whatever the case may be. I just can't justify bringing in 2 receivers in this class that aren't players that are going to move the needle on those other programs. I just, I wouldn't do it. Now, if you could bring in one of those guys and maybe at some point in time, Amorian Walker's out of the class, well, then maybe I'd feel better about that. But, with Walker and like Anderson or Walker and Groves or, guys like that, to me, it doesn't move the needle for me. So Griff says, I'd love to see Taylor Groves roaming the secondary at Notre Dame. I agree. He would excite me a lot more as a safety prospect than he does as a wide receiver prospect. Let's see if we have any more questions here. Michael Morris agrees. I love Groves as a safety. He's a baller. I agree with you guys very, very much. Yeah. No, it's called Massachusetts football. And let me tell you, it is not good. And so my second year as a coach, I was at Muhlenberg College, and that was one of my most fun years. But we played in the first round of the playoffs, which was our first playoff appearance in school history. This is the Division III national playoffs. We played the best team from that. There's a league that's like all these Massachusetts teams, like UMass Dartmouth is the team that we played. And they won like 10 games that year. And we slaughtered them. It was like 56-6 in the national playoffs. I mean, we had running backs as big as their defensive linemen. I mean, they were small. Now, they were quick and athletic, but we were pretty athletic too, but we were way bigger than they were. I mean, we had like 280, 275, 290-pound offensive linemen, and their biggest defensive lineman was like 230 pounds. I mean, we just physically beat them up. So they are a very, very small – there's not a lot of big dudes coming out of that state. Let's just say that. So, yeah, we'll see there. So let's see here. Blake Sofa. So all y'all, if you do not follow Blake Sofa on Twitter, please go do so. Blake is someone that I recently hired who's going to help us with recruiting. He's gonna have a list of guys. He's not going to necessarily be a full-time guy because he has another job that pays him a lot more than I can pay him. But he is at Blake ND Irish. So Blake is going to be helping us with recruiting. So welcome, Blake, to the Irish Breakdown family. And you're going to start seeing his name popping up in stories here very, very soon. I hope so. Very soon, Blake. So get to work, buddy. So welcome him to the deal. Griff says, coaching staff has backed themselves into a corner with only one slot player on the board. I would think the board probably won't be expanded at this point either. We addressed that a little bit earlier. We'll see. I think there are some kids that maybe could camp this summer, maybe not even just Notre Dame, but at other places where you could see that kind of change. There's some conversation about soy going on in this completely soy-free. Let's see here. Technical technician says Coach Driscoll is most definitely soy-free old school. Yeah, I've never had soy that I know of in my life. Soy sauce on Japanese food, but that's about it. There's no soy milk happening over here, if that's what you guys are talking about. Let's see here. Yeah, you guys are having some very interesting conversations. Saban James says, I don't get why Notre Dame hasn't offered Jaden Marshall. So I don't know who Jaden Marshall is, but let's watch some film of Jaden Marshall. So is he a 2022 player? Let's check real quick and see what year he is in. Since we're talking about wide receivers, let's see if he is a 2022 guy. So yes, so Saban James asks, he is from St. Mary's in Stockton, California. So since we're watching film tonight, let's pop in some film of Jaden Marshall. So let's get going here. Let's see if we can get some film here. We got some film of him against De La Salle, get some junior highlights. So, yeah, let's watch this film. Okay, so we're going to watch some film of Jaden Marshall, and we're going to kind of ask ourselves what Saban James is asking us, which is, why has Notre Dame not offered him? So let's check him out here real quick. All right. All right, let's pop it in. Let's check it out. See what he can do. Get through these stupid smoking ads. I don't smoke. I don't know why they keep showing me these ads. I've never smoked in my life. So let's watch this film. Let's check it out, Saban. California kid. Notre Dame's recruiting a lot of California kids in this class so far. Got the old school Rams helmets. Looks small. That would be one thing I kind of see. Listed at 6 foot 185. Doesn't necessarily look that big to me. Good athlete. A couple clips in. Decent burst. Not great acceleration. Good ball skills on that particular play. Yeah, same. I mean, again, we're 3-4 plays in. I think the first thing that notices to me is he doesn't pop, right? So, like, when I see a smaller guy, I want to see the guy pop. I want to see him pop on film. When I watched Xavion Bradshaw, I knew after 2-3 plays that, okay, this kid can play. And this kid's got some good skills, but I don't see, he's just not popping off to me. And I think that those plays right there were against De La Salle. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive. That's good competition, but he just doesn't pop to me yet. I would want to look at him and bring him in, maybe bring him into camp. He'd be a guy that we could talk about, like we talked about earlier, like, what kind of guys would you look at to say, hey, that next level offers? Hey, bring him into camp, check his size out, see if he's as big as he's listed, see what he tests in the 40 times, kind of like what they did with Jay Brunell, and Jay came in and earned an offer. So, some good skills there. he doesn't pop to me, Saban. That's the first thing that stands out to me is I don't see like great burst. I don't see great speed. I see a good high school football player. I don't know if I see a guy that I would look at and say, oh yeah, that guy's a Notre Dame player for me. He just doesn't pop for me like that. So I could be wrong. That's a tough quarterback right there. Good Lord. I mean, threw a pick, terrible throw, but he's bouncing off of defenders. I dig that. Nice. I like that hip change right there. That showed me a little something. He's playing defense. I like that. I like that toughness. Yeah, see, like even right there, like he's laboring a little bit to keep up with that guy. Does a nice job, but it's De La Salle, but he just doesn't pop for me, Saban. So I mean, to me, I wouldn't necessarily be upset with him not offering, but he'd be a kid I'd say, hey, let's get him into camp. Let's work him out in person. Let's see, just how well he projects at that point in time. Okay. There's a conversation going on about Steve Angeli. Let's see here. Trek reviewer. Okay, you were in the show earlier. We were talking about Nick McLeod making the team, so I appreciate you following up. But you asked me earlier about if the Bills play single high safeties, at least when they have only 2 safeties in the game. But sometimes they use 3 safeties at once, with one of them being in the box, with that usually being Poyer Hyde. Both of those two are good in run support and coverage. So if they're playing some stuff. Let's see here. Continuing that thought. 3 safeties at once. Okay, yeah, it's a double size. So look, if they're playing some too high safety stuff, then yeah, I think there could be a role for Nick McLeod to make that team. Because again, he's a good football player. I don't see a guy that necessarily is going to be playing a lot of man coverage, especially man coverage without safety help. So that's going to be, and that was sort of the issue that he had at Notre Dame. He gave up some, more big plays than what we're used to seeing, but smart, competitive, high character. All those things, Nick McLeod checks all those boxes for me. Michael Moore says, I like Bradshaw, but I'm tired of all these 6'4" guys. Give me a 5'10" kid that can run, speed kills. Yeah. It's funny is Notre Dame's putting all these giants on the football field, and then you watch Alabama and they're playing with a bunch of short guys, smaller guys. I mean, Slade Bolden's like 5'10", Devontae Smith's like barely 6 foot, buck 65, John Mechie's 6 foot. And they're out there dominating. You can be successful in all types of ways, but you need some dynamic players in the field. You need some guys that the quarterback doesn't always have to be perfect with, that the quarterback doesn't always have to beat you downfield with. You need some guys that you can just get the ball out to and say, go do something with it. In today's game, you just need that. Now, sometimes you get the big guys that can do that. LSU had some guys like that. But, you're just going to need more dynamic players. Ian Moran says Judy and Smith fit into any offense. Well, all those guys do. OP was right. That's a better squad than a lot of NFL teams. Yeah, Ian, I don't agree with that. I just like when you watch Notre Dame offense, they don't do a lot of things to me that would maximize their talents to the level that they would be able to maximize the other two bigger guys. Again, that doesn't say, my comment doesn't say they would suck at Notre Dame. It just means that if you put those two guys in the same offense, in certain offenses, one player is going to be better, and in another offense, another player is going to be better. And in Notre Dame's particular offense, the bigger vertical players have fit better to what they do. That's just the way it's been. Now, I hope that they change that. If they get to the RPOs, they start doing some of the things that I want them to do, then we can have a different conversation. If Tommy Rees continues to take the offense in the direction that I think and hope he's going to take it, then we can have a different conversation, and my answer would be different. But where they are right now, those are the players that, to me, fit best. I didn't say they're the only ones that fit or could play at Notre Dame, but they fit the best. And I wasn't given the option of taking all of them. I had to pick which one fit best. And with what Notre Dame has done in the past, the bigger guys, the LSU kids, fit better with what Notre Dame does. Kenny Moore says, just once I would like to see Notre Dame get multiple years of great play out of a receiver. It seems like we get one great year and that receiver either graduates or heads to the NFL. Hopefully that changes. Well, part of that is because a lot of times those breakouts happen, Kenny, when guys are older. Miles Boykin was a senior when he had his breakout. Chase Claypool had a pretty good junior year, but his breakout was a senior. He was out of eligibility. When you don't play guys young, their breakouts are going to kind of happen later. The last time I think Notre Dame's had a receiver that was dynamic for 2 years in a row was Will Fuller. That's because his breakout year happened as a sophomore, not as a junior. Let's see here. See if we got some more questions. Yeah, and Ian Moran kind of backs up what I'm saying. That goes back to not playing the younger guys at wide receiver. At least we get 3 from Mayer. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. I agree with you on that. Okay, let's see here. I hope I'm saying this right, but Lachey says, I'm blanking on the recruit who projects so well as a DB, but is there much on how the defensive staff feels about him? I know they're kind of struggling at safety, and if they like him, does he fit in their class? You'd be referring to Taylor Groves. I don't know where the staff is right now at safety, and I don't think they necessarily know. I know that right now the Notre Dame coaching staff is recruiting him to play wide receiver. Could that change after they get Jake Pope on campus and get KJ Winston on campus and get Xavier Bradshaw on campus and all those other safety recruits that Notre Dame is on and get them on campus? And if they don't feel great about it, but things are going really well with Taylor Groves, but also going well with CJ and Tobias and Xavion, then maybe you could sit down and have that conversation with Taylor. And I think he'd be open to it, which is to say right now, recruit him. All right. So Joseph Wan, you asked this last week, and we're going to watch his film today. So, we're talking about 2022 receivers, but you are in all these shows and you're always asking questions. So I appreciate you being a part of it. And the fact is we're going to watch some film here. So we're going to watch some film of 2023 receiver Noah Rogers, because Joseph keeps asking about him, and I've heard some good things about this young man. So let's watch some film. I'm going to make sure you guys don't have to watch that stinking commercial again. So I'm going to wait till that's gone before I pull this film up. But I watched a little bit of him the other day, and for a sophomore, there's some impressive stuff. So let's add this to the stream. This is Noah Rogers from North Carolina, who Joseph has been asking me about. He does have a Notre Dame offer, and the thing I'm going to notice is right there. Earlier somebody was asking about the kid from California, and I say, you just don't see him pop off the screen. What I notice about Noah Rogers is this kid pops off the screen. He is a kid that, to me, he's quick. He's got burst. He's got really good explosiveness. He's a good route runner for a soft kid. Look at that stop ability right there on that route. That's a really impressive pivot route to be able to just stop on a dime like that and break outside. Just leaves that guy hanging. Just really, really impressive. So yeah, I watched a little bit of Noah Rogers the other day, Joseph, and I came away very impressed. I don't know why that's showing up. Let's get out of there. But this kid can play. I don't know where things stand with Notre Dame and Noah. I have not been able to do really any digging on 2023 receivers. I'm still worried about the 2022 kids, but this kid popped on film. That's great concentration. So I appreciate you bringing this up again and bringing it up during a receiver show. So we're going to watch it. There's a couple 2023 kids that I've watched that are really, really good. I was trying to remember the name of a kid the other day that that Notre Dame, I thought, has a decent shot with is Cottrell. And Jalen Hale's a kid that's expressed interest in Notre Dame, and then obviously Cardinal Tate. But this kid's got excellent ball skills and concentration. But this kid pops on film to me. This is a kid that you watch and you're like, you don't have to watch very many plays to be like, yeah, this kid's really good. And this kid is really good. So Joseph, I appreciate you bringing that up again, buddy. This is a good film. This is a 2023 recruit. So if people are wondering why I did not bring up Noah Rogers during today's podcast, it's because he's not in the class that we're focusing on. But yeah, this young man can play. It's a good find, Joseph. I appreciate you bringing this up. Last couple shows. So he's really good. Here's a punt return, special teams, love it. Love guys can bring it. Look at this quickness. Got a little stuck in the dirt there. He's got some toughness for a little guy, though. He's a pretty skinny player, but he's got some toughness to him. You saw it earlier when he was catching balls with guys draped on him. You saw it there breaking tackles. It's good for – oh, come on, dude. Get out of the way. And this kid plays with some swagger, too. And I know maybe some people my age and older don't like guys that talked a lot of trash, but I talked a lot of trash when I played. I even talked trash when I played baseball. That's just how I played. So I don't have a problem with guys that play with swagger and talk trash. And this kid plays with some swagger. I like it. Really nice burst off the line, too. Another diving catch. Really good ball skills. So, Joseph, thank you for bringing that to our attention. And that kid can play. That kid can play. I want to be sicking recruiting guys on him as soon as possible. So, Blake, if you're still in the show, add him to your list of guys to contact. Omar Austin says, if Notre Dame doesn't get the top 3 running backs and don't reach a receiver if they don't get Bradshaw, what position would you load up on or just keep the powder dry? So are you asking if they don't get one of the top 3 running backs and don't get Bradshaw? Honestly, I'd probably get Williams and Tobias and call it a day unless I could find another Xavion Bradshaw caliber player. They're going to be missing that kind of guy. And that's a problem, but I wouldn't reach anywhere. I'd say maybe you use it for an extra lineman, but I wouldn't take 4 receivers just to take 4. I mean, that would be silly. And I'm not saying Mike said that. I don't know what Mike said. I'm making this comment for me is you don't take 4, just take 4. So like you don't take Anderson and then 2 more guys because now you've got 2 guys that don't move the needle and 2 guys that do. And to me, get 2 the needle movers, or the gap closers, the one guy that maybe isn't yet, and then focus on 2023. Focus on spending all your time on Cardinal Tate and Noah Rogers and Jalen Hale and guys like that. That's what I would focus on. Christopher says, hypothetically, if Notre Dame were to go undefeated, would a 1-loss SEC team bypass them into the playoff? No, they would not. S says, Coach, how much of route running is technical and how much is God-given? Today, there seems to be a premium on great route runners in the way offensive evolved, different coaching, or better athlete. I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think the God-given part isn't necessarily route running. It's about athleticism. And so what I mean by that is when you look at Jerry Jeudy to me is one of the best college route runners we've seen in a long time. There are things Jerry Jeudy does technically that are excellent. He's very efficient as a route runner. Those are coachable traits, right? What's not coachable, however, is the suddenness in which he can change the direction. That's not something you can coach. That specific skill, meaning the quickness, the foot quickness, those type of things, is God-given. The developed part is the specific technique that goes into that. So you could have elite athleticism, and this is what I was talking about earlier, to your point, S, is I don't care if a receiver is a great route runner in high school. I care, do you have the physical tools to become one? Because that's what I get paid for when I was a receivers coach. It's my job to teach you how to run the routes. I need to know that you have the God-given ability. If you have the God-given ability and you come play for me, you're going to become a great route runner sooner rather than later. That's true of a lot of the better receiver coaches. I mean, if you go to Ohio State and play for Brian Hartline, you're going to be a good route runner as long as you have the natural God-given ability. So when you take a guy that's got great God-given ability and then put him in an offense like Alabama's where he's going to get coached well, those two things are going to mesh incredibly well, and you're going to see exactly what we've seen where I would argue in the last 10 years, the 2 best route runners that I've seen coming out of college played in the same offense, and that's Devontae Smith and Jerry Jeudy. And part of that is God-given ability, but the other part of that is they were coached really well. So I think that to me is it's both. And you could be a great a really well coached player, but if you have tight hips, tight ankles, and you're a little bit stiff as an athlete, you're not going to be a great route runner. You may be a great vertical route runner on like things where it's more about your speed, like posts and post corners and go routes and drags and crossers, but you're not going to be a great route runner when it comes to like the double moves, the post curls, the stop routes, the comebacks, slants, hitches, things like that. You're not going to be as effective. And that's where you get that combination of, yes, it's God-given talent, but it's also a lot technical. You could have if Jerry Jeudy wasn't technically sound, he wouldn't be a great route runner, at least not against the better corners. He is a great route runner because he has the coaching with the God-given ability. Brandon says, for this to even be considered a successful wide receiver class, Notre Dame must land 2 of Williams, Bradshaw, Merriweather, or Green Jr. Agree, but Green Jr. is not really on the board right now. He's not a necessarily take for them right now. Like they're not pushing for him because he's not interested in them. So it's that's kind of how it went, but he's not really a guy that's on the board right now, and he's not really looking at visiting. So it's down to Williams, Bradshaw, and Merriweather. Griff says, I went to Muhlenberg for my freshman year for football, and we had a 6'6+ O tackle from Massachusetts. I remember watching his film, and he truly made everyone look like infants. Yeah, there's not big boys there. And Griff, I did not know that you went for Muhlenberg. Did you play for Coach Donnelly? If so, that was probably a treat. That's one of the coaches I respect absolutely the most, and I was sad when he passed away a couple years. But Mike Donnelly was one of the smartest football coaches I've ever been around, and I've hung around a lot of Division I people. So he was excellent. The Trek reviewer, is it fair to say that Notre Dame has not put out a top-notch NFL quarterback since Montana? Other than the rookie year for Rick Meyer, I think you're correct. I can't. Brady Quinn didn't do anything in the NFL. Jimmy Clausen didn't really do anything in the NFL. Deshaun Kaiser hasn't. 1990s, Ron Paulus didn't do much in the NFL. Obviously, Kevin McDougal was not. Tony Rice. Oh, Steve Berline. Yeah. I mean, to me, Steve Berline was a pretty good NFL quarterback. I mean, Steve had a 4,000-yard passing year for the Panthers, led the NFL in passing one year, was around for a long time. So I'd say I'd put Steve McNair in that category, or Steve Berline in that category. But since Montana, Berline is the only one, and that was the very beginning of the end of the Faust, early Lou Holtz era. So it's obviously been a while. So it kind of still makes your point. Let's see here. Ian Moran says it's Chandler Smith that needs to be viewed. Now, Chandler's an interesting player because Notre Dame, he's on Notre Dame's radar. And again, I still have not learned anything other than what Tom Loy has already reported, which he's on Notre Dame's radar. He is a very, very explosive athlete. Ian, my issue with him, however, is he's had 2 major injuries. He's had a knee injury and a shoulder injury that have cost him a lot of time. And that would, to me, would be concerning to me. Sup, TT says, Sup, the voice of Notre Dame football. I hope you're saying that about me. I would appreciate that very, very, very much. The Bears man said Chandler Smith, as I know him, CJ is a great player and guy. I go to his high school and he's the real deal. His film was impressive. Let's pull it up. I mean, he's a kid from Florida. Let's pull it up here real quick. But yeah, I've said this before. He reminds me of a taller Braden Lindsay when I watch him on film. But as I said, I'm a little concerned about his injury history. That's really the only thing that concerns me a little bit. So, and Blake just texted me, said Noah Rogers has been added to his list, so he will get on him. So let me see if I can find his film here on Huddle. That's not him. It's a lot of Chandler Smiths. Goodness gracious. All right. Is this him? I believe this is him. Let's see here. These ads on Huddle just drive me absolutely crazy. Yeah, here we go. So this is Chandler Smith. So let's watch him. And again, I think you guys are going to love his athleticism and explosiveness. He can run. But again, I get really nervous about the injury history. Let me take this down. And I think, honestly, that's a big reason why more schools haven't offered him, because it's not about his speed and athleticism, and he's got some toughness. I think the injury history is what's really concerning some teams. But he's athletic. He's got to work on his press moves there. Can't let a corner get into your chest like that, but makes a heck of a catch. He's got some schooling he needs to work on, but you can see in these clips he's got very long arms. I think that's something I like. He looks at least to be 6'1". I mean, you go to school with him, you probably will know better than I do, but his track times are outstanding. And he puts up some monster track times with technical work. So he's the kind of guy to me that is exactly what I point to. He's not a great route runner right now. He's just really athletic. But I see the foot quickness, I see the speed, I see the balance, I see the change of direction to where you give me a receivers coach, a kid like that, and I guarantee you he's going to be dynamic because I'm going to teach him how to run routes. The tools are there. He just has to work at it. So if he's like not a great route runner in high school, I don't care. Because it's funny, I was recruited by NC State slightly out of high school, and they invited me to their camp to work out at their camp. And I went to their camp. I thought I had a really good camp. I was like second on the jugs machine. I was like second or third when it come to throwing the furthest. Did really well in drills, and they didn't pay much attention to me. And they were talking to these 2 6'4" guys. It sucked. So I asked one of the coaches, I was like, you invite me here, paying all this money to be here. Like, why aren't you recruiting me? And the coach, and one of them, I respected the guy. He goes, look, you see that kid over there? And he pointed some kid from Pennsylvania that sucked. He said, I can teach that kid to throw football. I can't teach you to be 6'5". Oh, okay. It's the realest thing anyone's ever told me. But that's how I feel about, receivers is like, look, I can teach you how to play receiver. I can teach you how to run routes. I can work with you on your ball skills. I can't teach you to be 4'4". I can't teach you to be 6'4". I can't teach you to have suddenness. God's in control of that, not me. I can teach you how to run routes, but that's it. And this kid's got some tools. But like I said, he hasn't been offered yet. And he's a guy that I would imagine Notre Dame's going to want to do some more digging medically on before they offer him a scholarship. But he's got some tools. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. I'm glad you guys brought him up because he was not someone I planned on talking about tonight for the reasons I mentioned, but he can play. Okay, Jeff Fluke says, do you think our new offensive philosophy will hurt other teams' defenses? Yes. He says, we'll hurt the tight end you mantra. No, I don't think so, because I think that the new philosophy fits in very well with utilizing tight ends. And if anything, it takes some of the pressure off tight ends in regards to if you're spreading the field and you're forcing teams to defend the width of the field, it makes it a lot harder for them to focus on in between the numbers where the tight ends are going to do a lot more damage. So to your point, Jeff, I think it's a very fair question, but I actually think it helps the tight ends because I think it's going to allow them to get in more. They're going to have more space to work, and it's going to allow them to get into more favorable matchups when you're forcing teams to have to defend the width of the field. Tommy Leonard says, just based on the number of tight ends on the roster, they're still going to use multiple tight end sets, so probably not. But I don't think it's necessarily about using multiple tight end sets, Tommy, as much as it's about how are you using the tight ends. Brandon says Nathaniel Joseph is another playmaker in the 2020 in the 23 class that Notre Dame has been offered. He's from the Miami area, and supposedly talking to some sources down there, he's a very good student and would fit in very well at Notre Dame. Chris Walter says, why is Coach Kelly so poor at developing receivers? I wouldn't criticize him for that. I don't think it's a development thing of receivers. I mean, I think if you look at Notre Dame, they've actually done a good job of developing receivers. By the time these guys are done, they're usually good players. I think my issue, however, is the speed with which they do it. And that's more of my criticism, is that they don't do enough to get these guys ready to play early. And it takes time to get there. So Griff, you missed out on Coach Donnelly. That's a bummer. Coach Donnelly was a great man. Brandon says Raymond Cottrell is the receiver I think you were thinking of, Brian. I definitely need to watch his film. Yes, you do. He is really good. He's a bigger kid, very athletic. He's a very talented player. Brandon Innes is another 23 receiver from Florida they offered, but I don't know if there's much traction. But but back to the question that Chris asked. I also think the part of the issue that Notre Dame has now is sort of a Dell Alexander problem, but also a makeup of the staff problem. And here's what I mean by that. I thought Mike Denbrock was a really good developer of receivers. I thought Notre Dame did a good job. And when you point back to, the people that get really in their feelings every time you criticize Notre Dame, they point to Kevin Stefferson and TJ Jones and guys like that. And I'm saying, well, that coach who coached those guys isn't here. Tony Alford was the receivers coach in 2010. Mike Denbrock was the receivers coach for Will Fuller and who played as well as a sophomore. He was the receivers coach for Kevin Stefferson and Equanimous St. Brown, who had his breakout as a sophomore. Who's been the sophomore breakout since Brian Kelly's been here? Or since Del Alexander's been here? Well, one of the things that helped Mike Denbrock, because remember, Mike Denbrock was also Notre Dame's offensive coordinator, is they had a GA that worked with the receivers as well that is now coaching. I think he's at Western Kentucky now, but I thought he did a really nice job helping as well in similar fashion to what we saw with Chris Watt, and that was Ryan Mahaffey. So I think that's part of it too. Is Dell's kind of doing it by himself, as far as I know, whereas Mike Denbrock had a really good GA, which he needed because he was also the offensive coordinator. Brandon says a lot of playmakers in the 23 class, a lot of elite talent with elite speed. If Notre Dame can't land the Bradshaw and Williams Merriweather trifecta, then maybe take at most 3 in the 22 class that we can grab 3 in 23. I agree with you wholeheartedly, which goes back to the question I was asked earlier about, would you take one of those tier 2 guys and then 2 others to get to 4? No, I would not. I would take 3. And if you only get Merriweather, I would still just go with Merriweather and Walker. I mean, it's going to put you in a little bit of a numbers crunch, but figure it out. You just can't keep taking guys that aren't going to move the needle. Let's see. We got last few questions here before we take off. Let's see here. All right, here's an interesting one. Christopher says, if all of the rumors are to be believed, Aaron Rodgers shares your admiration of Jerry Jeudy's route running ability. I don't know a single person on the planet that doesn't think Jerry Jeudy's an elite route runner. And honestly, I think that I know Aaron Rodgers is a great player and all that, but I'm not giving up 3 first-round draft picks and a premium player for Aaron Rodgers. That's just me as a Broncos fan. I'm also a lot higher on Drew Lock than a lot of people are. And I get why people are down on him because of how he played this year, but I look at a young quarterback that was always raw, was working with a new offensive coordinator, a new quarterback's coach, in an offseason where he had a bunch of new receivers and no offseason, no camps, no mini camps because of COVID. I think Drew Lock is gonna end up being a really good player. Brandon says, Brian, you make a great point about Smith and his injury history. I hope Notre Dame doesn't extend the offer and rather focus on the big 3. Look, I'm good with them extending the offer if they are comfortable with his medical stuff. If they get his medicals back and it's like, yeah, okay, he had a minor knee thing or he had his shoulder wasn't that bad or whatever the case may be, then I'm okay with it. I really am. It's just they got to do their homework first. You can't just look at the film and say we're going to offer that kid. You have to do your homework first when you find out about that kind of injury history. And so, he's on my radar. I would want to get him on camp. He's definitely on my radar because you can't teach that kind of speed. And then Joseph Wan, we'll leave with this. Love the film breakdowns in the show. Joseph, I appreciate you being part of the show. And then we're going to start doing, like I said, we're going to start doing more of this. We did quarterbacks last week, receivers this week. I think I'm going to do cornerbacks next week. Looking at obviously Jaden Mickey's junior year. We'll look at Benjamin Morrison. We'll look at Devin Moore. We'll look at Nakai Martinez. Maybe do some other things. All right there. Let's see here. All right, so a couple of questions. OP Dragon 19. What's up, Brian? Love the site on Notre Dame football. With the lack of development of wide receivers, do you think it's time to part ways with Coach Alexander? Look, this is my thing. I do not advocate for firing coaches unless it's a situation where they're doing something morally or ethically wrong. That's just not my place. It does me no good to go out there and advocate for coaches to be fired. I have been a coach. I was a coach who got fired. I know what it was like to go home and tell my wife that we have to pack up and move from this community that you've gotten comfortable with around family and those type of things. That's just not something I'm going to do. I'm going to be critical and say, hey, look, you're not doing the job. You're not doing a good enough job. You need to have a conversation with this guy. He's got to get going. But I'm just not comfortable with going out there and saying you got to fire the guy. I'm not going to do that, especially someone like Del Alexander, who from everything I've ever heard is a great guy, and it's the same reason I never advocated for firing Scott Booker. I thought Scott Booker was a mediocre coach and a pretty mediocre to bad recruiter. But he was a really good dude, and it's not my place to do that. The closest I ever came to advocating for a coach to be fired was Brian Van Gorder. And it wasn't just about him being a terrible coach. It was a bad person, in my opinion, from some things I heard. But again, it wasn't somebody I saw firsthand. And so I'm just not going to do it. I think Coach Alexander's history tells me he knows how to coach receivers. I think there are some things that have a personality conflict that makes it hard for him to go out and just do the job that I think he knows how to do. He's got to get over that. That's on him. Coach Reese and Coach Kelly got to sit him down and say, hey, Dell, this is the expectation. You got to go get it done. And then he's got to stop worrying about, getting chewed out or getting in trouble or whatever else that may be going on, and just go coach those kids up. Do what you did for years that got you to this place. And I think if he does that, then I think they'll be fine, because he developed receivers at Wisconsin. He developed receivers at Arizona State. I think he's a good football coach. I just don't think he's doing a good job right now at Notre Dame. And I hope that turns around, because I think Coach Alexander's capable of it. So that's where I'm at. Kenny Moore, great analysis tonight. Brian, good night, everyone. Kenny, thanks for being part of the show, man. I'm really glad that your work schedule's worked out to the point where you can now be on the show more often. That is great to hear. So I want to thank everybody for joining me tonight. Jeff, we will not be doing a kicker punter show. We're going to be doing cornerbacks next week. We'll dive into offensive linemen soon as well. We'll definitely try to get into the offensive linemen before the June visits start, because there's some very good offensive linemen on the board. And I think that's going to be some fun film, and I like watching linemen. I think that's fun film to watch. So we'll dive into that, do corners next week. We'll do some linemen the week after, maybe do a couple in 1 week. We'll see how it goes. Depends on what kind of other topics we get into. But I want to thank everybody for joining me. Before you leave, please, please, please hit the like button on this show. If you have not subscribed to Irish Breakdown, hit the subscribe button. It's real easy. You're going to see a little thing like right down here with our logo on it. Just click on that. It's the subscribe button. You're going to see it. Subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and do me a favor. If you like our channel, if you want to help us grow, then share this with your Notre Dame friends. Tell people about Irish Breakdown. Sign up for the Irish Breakdown newsletter, which I have a link to at the bottom. Our YouTube channel is at the bottom. Our link to our podcast is at the bottom, which is basically our YouTube channel, so you don't necessarily need to do both. You can see a link to our website, and you can also see a link to sign up for the daily newsletter, so that way you get all of our content in your mailbox in the morning. Those are things that you can do, is sharing our stuff. If you can't support us financially, then support us by reading the stories, watching our videos. Those are things that also help us make money. And then share it with your friends. And as TT says, best Notre Dame content, I agree. I think we have the best Notre Dame content around. And that's saying something, because there's a lot of talented people that cover Notre Dame football. So I appreciate you all being a part of it. I'm going to go grab some a late dinner here, but I look forward to chatting with all of you again tomorrow. Everybody have a safe, fun rest of your night, and we'll chat again very soon.